Hi, here's May and welcome to this video, which is all about OCs or original characters and designing them. A while ago I decided I wanted to design some OCs, mainly because I wanted to create a video from it, but also because I never really tried it for myself. I mostly just drew random characters and didn't really think about a backstory or anything more in depth with it before, but since many artists like to do this and I also got interested in it, I decided I wanted to try it out. And in this video I'll provide you with some ideas and things you can look out for when designing an OC or a cast of OCs, since I also designed a cast of OCs, and with that you also can look out for if they look good together and so on. But more about that later on. This video will focus on the designing aspect. I will upload a part 2 next week in which I'll talk more about the personality and coming up with a backstory of the characters. At first, I'll just give you a general tutorial-like idea of how you can go about designing your OCs. Then I'll talk a bit about my own process when designing the cast of OCs, and I'll go more into detail with 3 of the 6 characters I designed later on. It all starts with deciding why do you want to create your OCs, what do you want to use them for, how often will you draw them, what is the purpose of your OCs. Of course, you don't have to go really deep every time you design a new OC. It's up to you. You can also just randomly design something. But if you want to put some more thought into it, you can start with asking yourself these questions. And then when you have thought about that, you can go on to the next steps. And when you're designing a cast of OCs, you also can ask yourself how will they look together and what makes each character unique, why they still fit together, and you can see that they belong to the same story, the same universe. But oftentimes, because artists have their unique styles, the OCs will probably already look like they fit together. And when you have figured that out, it's all about getting your inspirations and gathering some background information about your character. You can come up with some colors or themes, like dark or bright. You can also use aesthetics. And while combining all of these inspirations, it's always helpful to look out for what do you like about character designs yourself and what do you want to learn with it. You can take all these different parts and pick what you like, then combine them and get your OC inspiration. This might start with a more visual inspiration type of thing, and then you can also go on to picking specific outfit pieces or in general a fashion style and maybe also a hairstyle and get references for that. And for designing a cast, it's always good to have each character have kind of a different silhouette, or even if they have the same uniform, just have something about their outfit stand out for each character. And for characters specifically, the face is always very important. So if you want distinct facial features or so on, or have each character have different eye shapes or something like that, that's also a good thing to plan here, especially if you don't want your characters to suffer from same face syndrome. But of course that's also okay. I mean, most anime and their characters have very similar faces and just differing color palettes and so on. The body type can also vary, and this also just depends on what kind of characters you really want to design and what your own style when drawing characters in general is. When you have all of those things figured out, you can then draw your characters for the first time, and if you want to pose them all together or something like that, it's a very good idea to have each character have a pose that fits their personality and makes them unique from each other. But if it's your first time drawing the OC, I would advise not to go for a too dynamic foreshortened pose or something like that, and more of a from up front pose facing the viewer. You can also just start with turnaround sheets like they do in animation studios, Because if you want to draw your character multiple times, it's very useful to have your general proportions of the character figured out. And if you want to, you can add coloring, shading and so on. For my first designs, I often like to just stick with a simple coloring and shading style. But now that I've given you an outline of how you can approach designing a cast of characters in general, I'll give you the example of how I did it with my 6 characters, what I was thinking about and how I implemented what I just talked about. And maybe you can get some inspiration for your own character designs from this. Here you can see I started out with drawing a general humanoid character in a standing pose. Then I went on to draw some outfits for this generic character. When I have to come up with multiple outfits, I like to try to include a variety of clothing pieces and so on. After I came up with some outfits, I then went on to just draw some accessoire ideas I had. Accessoires can be very good at giving your character a unique feature. And then finally I came up with 6 different poses, and in my style the body type is very similar from each character to one another. It's like rather slim, tall characters. So I basically went with the general proportions I had from the first pose and applied them to some different poses. And as you can see, these poses are not too complicated, but still wanted to include a variety of poses. After coming up with the poses, I also made another document where I explored how I wanted the faces and hairstyles to look like, since I wanted that to be what stood out the most about each character, since I'm going for more of a like anime style. The faces of all of the characters are very similar. As you can see, I used the same proportions for them, but I changed slight features like the eyes, but only a little. I think in the future I would try to make the eyes and maybe also some other features more different. In general, I came up with 3 face shapes, which were all still similar, but I used each one of them I think 2 times for the characters, so 2 characters have the same face shape, and then for all of the characters different eyelashes. For the hairstyles and the hair colors and so on, I already had an idea of some hairstyles I wanted to definitely include, like the 2 buns on the head or something like that, since I haven't seen that a lot with other characters. For the hair colors, I also kind of knew which ones I wanted to include, which were 1 pastel blue, pastel purple, then 1 pastel pink, 1 white, 1 black and 1 blonde hair color. It's kind of a mix of unnatural and natural hair colors, but all of them are rather light except for the black one. And when I already had those hair colors figured out, I then went on to do the colored palettes for all of the characters. I did this before I started designing any of the characters in general. I really like having everything figured out, like which kind of outfit pieces, which hairstyle, which color palette and so on the character would have in the beginning. And here with the color combinations, I struggled with it in the beginning, since I already knew that I like purple and blue the most, and then pink and turquoise. And I also really wanted 2 characters to have this black and white contrast. In general, I designed 6 characters, and I wanted that to be kind of these couples of 2 characters where they would complement each other well in their color palettes, but also story-wise I had some small ideas, but I'll talk more about that in the second video. The main struggle was that I basically had all the color combinations figured out except for I wanted the 6th character to have a turquoise or gold palette. But then I decided I would go for the gold palette, but in the end I also included lots of turquoise in some of the outfit designs, and even with the black and white characters I included colors. But I would also really like to just design some black and white and maybe gray character in the future. That's how I went about picking all of the colors for the characters and the color palettes, but I also wanted to have kind of a limited color palette so I could reuse the colors for the different illustrations I wanted to do later on. And to have all of the colors look more cohesive together, what I did was that I first had all of my colors picked, but then added this purple hue by using a soft light layer on top, just so all of the colors would look nicer together. That's how I went about coming up with all of the colors for the characters. For the eye colors of all of the characters, I also had an idea of what kind of eye colors I wanted to include. Even for the black and white character, I knew that I wouldn't want the eyes to just be gray or black and white. I really like rather colorful eyes and also not that natural eye colors. For the characters with the pastel blue and pastel purple hair, I just wanted them to have the same eye color, just more saturated. Then for the character with blonde hair, I wanted to have pink eyes, and then the character with pink hair, which I wanted to have kind of blonde or golden eyes, so they have the eye color of the other character's hair. And lastly, for the last pair, their eye colors were just turquoise and pink. Turquoise for the white, pink for the black character. I really like the pink and turquoise color combination, but I also wanted the pink of the character with black hair to be a little different from the one with the blonde hair. Overall, all the eye colors then were blue, purple, pink, golden, turquoise, and one other pink color. And now I show you my process of drawing and designing outfits for 3 of the characters from the 6 ones. Specifically, the first character I'm gonna talk about in more detail is Mizu, and this is the mood board I came up with for the character. As you can see, I wanted to use a blue palette. I also included some hairstyle inspiration, outfit inspiration, and then this. And then I also wanted all of the characters to have a bag. And for Mizu, I wanted to use a peach pattern on the jacket as well. And for the first and second one, I also recorded them just using regular screen capture, but as you may have noticed, over the last videos I only used like the time-lapse function of Krita, which is the program I used to draw. Since when I record using screen capture, my tablet PC often loses the connection to the pen and I have to restart it, and it's a very time-consuming process. So I probably also not include speed paints where I capture the whole screen and all the zooming in and zooming out and so on in the future, but here I tried to do it for the first 2 illustrations. For the rest I just used the screen capture function, but I think after you see a bit about the process with the zooming in and so on, you probably already get an idea of how I like to draw. Then I went on to just draw the outfit, and the hairstyle I already came up with in all the hairstyle documents, but of course I had to draw the hairstyle in a polished version for the first time, which was also kind of challenging. And especially since this was the first character I drew out of all of the 6 of them, I really struggled with defining what kind of style I wanted to go for with the faces. I sometimes have this problem that no matter what I change, I'm not sure, I don't like it, I think it doesn't look that great, but at the same time I don't know what I really would want to change so that it would look the way I wanted to. I think it's just the problem that many artists have, that they always see that they could improve in their own art, so nothing they draw really looks perfect. But yeah, that was something I struggled with in drawing in general here. And even though I already had a palette figured out for this character, I also played around with where I wanted each color to be. It's good to have a balance of colors, some of them making up a bigger part of the whole outfit and some of them just for details. Then you'll also see me do a second speed paint. After I drew all of the 6 characters in their full body version, I also drew them for a Meet the OC illustration I wanted to do for each one of them. And at this point I used the original illustration, but I also did some portrait illustrations, but I don't like how they turned out, since at that time something about drawing faces, it wasn't working for me. Or at least now when looking back, I don't like how they turned out. But for the full body ones, I think the faces are alright. I think they look a lot better than for the portrait illustrations. But yeah, for this Meet the OC drawing, I then designed some other outfits and reused some of the colors from the color palettes, but as I said before, I also included some new colors for the outfits, but all of them were still from this original color palette I came up with in the beginning. And now let's talk about the second character for this video, which is Chiyo. This character was focused a lot on pink, and in general he's a very outgoing person, but I'll also talk more about it in the second video. I was inspired a lot by the kidcore aesthetic for this character. I in general used one aesthetic for each of the characters, and for Mizu, for example, I forgot to mention it, but I was inspired by the sparkle core aesthetic, and yeah, for Chiyo it's the kidcore aesthetic. You can see I again included some outfit inspirations, also what kind of bag, and this necklace. Then I went on to do the full body illustration once again. And for Chiyo, his shirt has these stripes. For all of the characters, I wanted the outfits to have some pattern. For Mizu, it was the peaches, and then for Chiyo, for one there were these stripes, but then also the strawberries, which I think just really fits to him. And after I was done with the full body illustration, I also did a second outfit once again, while the first outfit was more focused on a lot of pink colors. An accessoire I added for Chiyo was the hair clips and also his necklace. He's also the type of person that wears a lot of bracelets and in general colorful accessoires. And the last character for this video, which I'll talk about, is Yumi. At first he was one of the two characters I just wanted to have black and white as a combination, and the combinations for the characters. One of the characters I mentioned in this video is part of one of the pairs. So for Yumi he's white, and then there's Shin, who I'll talk about in the second video, whose main color is black. But yeah, for Yumi I also included turquoise, and then for Shin pink. I really like the turquoise and pink color combination. But then for Chiyo, you saw he was very focused on pink. Then Hira, I also talk about him in the second video. It was the gold palette, so pink and gold was also another combination. But for example, for Hira's second outfit, he also has a turquoise dress. As I said in the beginning, I really couldn't decide between gold and turquoise at first for him, so at least I included one outfit that has turquoise. So one of his outfits is just gold and one is turquoise. It's kind of a good compromise. Lastly, Mizu has a blue color palette, pastel blue, and then Rai, the other character from this pair, has a purple color palette. And Yumi was inspired by the happy core or also love core aesthetic, even though he doesn't have that much reds and pinks in his outfit, just a little pink, but it was more of a vibe inspiration. For the mood board, I again just picked some flowers. I imagined he would really like flowers, and also a necklace with a butterfly. Butterfly was also something I wanted for Yumi to have as kind of a visual detail that stood out about him. Then I went on to draw his outfit again with all of the references, and he also has a backpack. The kinds of bags I wanted all of the characters to have were pretty different. Yumi and Shin, the black and white color combination characters, both have just backpacks. Then the other characters, Mizu has this tote bag, Rai has a kind of a bigger purse, and then for Chiyo and Hira I didn't draw them with their bags in their original character illustration, but Chiyo has this cute little backpack, and Hira has a purse but with these short handle things. I'll show the different mood boards for all the other characters and their final designs now, but if you don't want to get spoiled for the second video, then just skip forward. I also talk a bit about the mood board since this is the design video, and it makes sense to also include the other mood boards and designs, but in the second video I'll talking about the personality traits and so on of the characters. I'll include the time lapses of the other character illustrations and also talk about the meet the OC thing with all the things I filled in there. I hope you can see from these mood boards that overall what I included in them was pretty similar, with different outfit pieces and accessoires, but then also just visual inspiration photos like collages or patterns. For the pattern, you already know what I did for Mizu and Chiyo, and then for Yumi, then we have the flowers, but also the butterfly. And you can see that for Rai, I wanted him to be inspired by Space Core, and with that some stars and constellation patterns. And for Hira, I wanted him to also have a flower pattern inspiration mainly, but still a little different from Yumi, who also has a butterfly as an inspiration. For Hira, it's just flowers. And lastly, for Shin, I wanted to go with geometric forms and triangles. All of these patterns are things I myself find visually interesting and appealing, and I think that's always very important when you're designing characters and you get to choose what they look like. Then why not implement the things you like? But you can also, of course, deliberately go for something that you usually wouldn't go for or like, and try to turn it into something you would like. And for Yumi's second outfit, while his first outfit has this turquoise and a little pink, second one has more blue palette. The colors were still from this bigger color palette I came up with in the beginning video, but for now I'll talk a bit about the coloring and shading process I in general went for when drawing all of the illustrations with these characters. And in general, this is a line art color shading style I really enjoy and have used a lot for a long time now, but sometimes I also like to go for a more advanced approach. And finally, here you'll just see a quick time lapse of drawing all of the characters together. At first I always do the sketching phase. This is very rough. I'm just figuring out the body proportions. Then I go on to the line art, and over time I've gotten more into thin line art like in anime. But at some point I also did the line art, I think like 1 pixel too thin, so I adjusted it again. I can get very picky with the line art. I really like in general using a line art based approach. I already know I don't like the painterly style that much. I can work with some shadows that are more painted, but at first I always have to do the line art and flat colors. I would never start with painting shapes and something like that in, only maybe for backgrounds. And with line art, I always find that what can change up the most with how I draw is how much detail I want the hair to have, how many strands I want there to be in the hair. And after the line art was all done, I just filled in the flat colors using the color palettes I came up with originally. And then I tried to include more advanced shading for the hair, meaning I painted some things into them for this. I used some painterly strokes here, but I decided not to go with this in the end, since I also wanted to include this illustration in my animatic with all of the OCs, and in none of the other illustrations they had this shaded hair, and I think I also preferred it without the shading, but I just wanted to try it. And you might feel like sometimes that's kind of a waste of time when you've done it, but when you've done it once and you see that you don't like it, you don't have to try it again for some time, which is always good. I also included this kind of shading style for the hair for my Genshin Impact Mermaid illustration, but since none of my other OC illustrations for the animatic specifically, I didn't include this hair shading. Didn't want to change it up just for this one illustration. And when I'm done with the flat colors and so on, the shading process I use is, I also had already picked a default skin shading color. I always shade the neck, since even in anime and so on I noticed the shadow under the neck is the thing that can sometimes stand out a lot. And even if the rest of all of the shading is just regular cell shading, sometimes the neck shading varies, but for me I just use regular cell shading here. And then for the faces I also include some shading on the nose, which I got this from drawing and seeing the Ensemble Stars cards, and I tried it once and then I really liked it, so I decided I wanted to include this in the way I color skin. For the rest of the shading, I just use regular cell shading, picking colors as I go, sometimes using filter masks, and then in the end I like to duplicate my line art layer, and depending on the illustration, sometimes I only use one, most of the time dark brown line art color, but then sometimes I also like to change up the line art for the skin to be a more reddish, lighter tone, and maybe even for blue parts of outfits or something like that I would make the line art more blue. But in general, with the duplicated layer of the line art, I blur it and sometimes put it on overlay mode. This can vary a bit from illustration to illustration, but in general, one blurred line art layer with around 2 pixels blurriness, and then above that the general line art. But that's it for the coloring process I did go for with these illustrations. And this is more of a stylistic choice, but this of course also heavily influences what your OCs will look like in the end. You can also even change up your whole style with different casts of OCs if you want to. But with that, this video comes to an end, and I hope you learned a lot about designing characters and how you can go about designing your original characters. I hope you enjoyed also hearing about my original characters and maybe got some inspiration from them. If you want to know more about coming up with personality and backstory for the characters, maybe even character inspirations for your characters, or you can approach all of that, the more writing side of creating original characters, you can look forward to the next part of talking about creating OCs. I hope you have a great day and goodbye.